Hello and welcome to this edition of the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. I am your moderator, Cheryl Washington, and today we're going to go beyond the story of Crazy Rich Asians. Now, this film first premiered in 2018 and was a global box office smash, earning upwards of $230 million, and it was hailed as a major step forward for Asian representation in Hollywood. Now, you know the film. It stars Constance Wu, Henry Golding, Gemma Chan, Lisa Liu, Awkwafina, Ken Jeong, and Oscar winner Michelle Yeoh. So today we're going to talk with our guest, special guest, in fact, Rebecca Sun, who is the senior editor of diversity and inclusion at the Hollywood Reporter, where she oversees equity and representation. She is an alumna of the Gold House A100 list of the most impactful APIs in culture, and her reporting has won both National Arts and Entertainment Journalism and Southern California Journalism Awards from the Los Angeles Press Club, as well as GLAAD Media Awards. And so we also want to mention that just this month, she received the inaugural Trailblazer Award for Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. In other words, she's a big deal. And I'm so glad to have you here with us with the Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. Rebecca, a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise, Cheryl, thank you so much for inviting me to join.
I almost don't feel worthy because you have so many important accolades, but you know what? It's all good. I'm just so glad that you're here. And I know that this is very important for you because this time with you is going to be very impactful as you're about to become a brand new mother. So congratulations in advance to you and your husband.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that.
Our pleasure. Well, let's talk about the film, which we just had a chance to screen. This movie, I've got to tell you, I have seen maybe 50 million times, and that's no exaggeration. Every time it would come on, my daughter would say, again, you know every line, you cry, you laugh. And I guess that's the purpose of it too, just to be able to allow some of those emotions to be transferable, if you will, from how we live in our everyday situations to something that we can kind of look at on film and kind of say, not so bad. And we're not living such a bad lifestyle. I must tell you, it made me want to go to Singapore like that. And so I don't know about you if you've ever traveled there, but I'll tell you something. I would like to be able to get there. Just the airplane alone was enough for me to say, I'm in.
So yeah, I've only traveled on Singapore Airlines to other countries in Asia. I've never been able to actually stop in Singapore myself, but I do agree that that film is a postcard, for Singapore tourism. And incidentally, if any of us ever has this opportunity to go to Singapore's Changi Airport, that is considered one of the most beautiful airports in the world. They have a living butterfly garden in the airport, and it's on my bucket list of things to see one day.
Absolutely. Well, let's break this down because this movie, for all that it's worth, it's got some positive images and it's got some criticism as well. And I guess I want to be able to talk to you about that very realistically and very honestly. But first, let me ask you this. How faithful was the movie to the book itself?
That's a great question. So actually, the screenplay does take some departures from the book. If anybody has a chance to read the best-selling novel from Kevin Kwan, the characters are the same. So, you just saw the film. Rachel is a Chinese American who meets Nick, who is actually turns out to be from this very wealthy and fabulous Singaporean family. Eleanor, his mother, disapproves. I mean, and then he's got all these like colorful cousins, from the very stylish and wise Astrid to the, outlandish, other cousins who live, all around Asia. So the bones of it are there. I will say that there were certain things, the major departures are, so the resolution of the novel and the movie are a little bit different. The novel is part of a trilogy. And so the way in which the scenes, the mahjong scene is original to the movie. The dumpling making scene in the middle is original to the movie. The airplane proposal, a lot of that stuff that actually I honestly really, really love is comes from the screenwriters and from the director, John Chu. The book ends it a little differently. It's not quite as totally resolved in terms of the central conflict. And there's other aspects that are a little difficult to put into a 2-hour movie. For example, the Young family, so Nick's family in the book, they're so wealthy that they're actually not known to like Aquafina's family. They're not known to the nouveau riche. They're part of this old money class that is
Mhm.
very not so non-ostentatious in their wealth, kind of the way that it
Mm.
honestly works in real life around the world. You know, the wealthiest families are not the ones with the branded handbags. They're the ones who look like they're just dressed in like a white t-shirt and blue jeans, but that white t-shirt costs more than my car, you know, that sort of thing. So both are really, really fun, but they're a little bit different.
A little bit now, I read something that you had written about how this this story kind of mirrored your own trip to the altar. And I want to talk to you a little bit also about the wedding scene because that wedding scene was so over the top. I don't know if that's considered normal in the culture, but I'll tell you something. It makes me want to say to my husband, "You robbed me."
That wedding scene, I mean, I'm pretty confident in saying that's not necessarily normal to like in the Asian culture that I come from. That's more of a like a super wealthy culture, you know, maybe that's more of the standard, but again, I do think that's part of the genius, and that's one of the reasons why Crazy Rich Asians did become an instant rom-com classic, because none of us has ever seen a wedding that spectacular committed to film before. I think it's probably mostly pure fantasy. There are indeed multi-million dollar weddings in
Mm.
Asia. Again, not super common by default. We're talking about 0.001 percenters here, but there have been multi-million dollar weddings. I remember there's these two celebrities, Chinese celebrities, Angelababy and Huang Xiaoming, who famously had a super, super expensive wedding in, I think it was either Hong Kong or China. You know, so that kind of thing takes place. It's very rare because
Yeah.
that thing is very expensive. But that part wasn't my experience. I had a very simple and humble wedding that my husband and I paid for ourselves. But the emotional journey of what it took to
Mm.
get there, I really found very resonant in the film.
But now you talked about in that article that there are aspects that really do relate to your own family, both your husband and yourself. Could you just kind of shed a little bit of light on that? How you relate, or how your family, in fact, is somewhat commensurate to the characters who are in the film?
Absolutely. So I think that one common experience that many people have, regardless of what ethnic culture you come from, is sometimes your parents disapprove of, you know, the partner that you've chosen in life, and that was definitely the case for me and my husband for a long time, pretty much the entire time that we dated, which was about 5 years or so. Um, and what I appreciated about the about Crazy Rich Asians, and particularly the way the film treated it, was it wasn't about something that was as superficial as just how much money you make. You know,
Mm.
as you can see in the movie, that might be at first glance, it looks like the Young family disapproves of Rachel because she's not from their social class, you know, because she's not rich. That's actually not true. When she has the multiple conversations with, you know, Eleanor, it becomes clear that what Eleanor doubts is that Rachel has the cultural values that she would be willing to put family first,
Mhm.
family above her own ambitions. You know, the way that Eleanor herself, as played by Michelle Yeoh, did. You know, she never became a lawyer. She
Right.
stopped that pursuit as soon as she got married and had children. And so similarly, I think that it was, you know, in my experience, it was something much more nuanced where,
Mhm.
you know, my family, out of just this overwhelming sense of protective love for me, they just feel, you know, doubt or skepticism over like who could be good enough to be willing to sacrifice themselves for my child. You know, it's a very sort of protective type of approach. And at the same time, for the child, what I found very unique about Crazy Rich Asians was that there was a genuine understanding that it wasn't so easy just to say, well, I don't care what my parents think. I'm
Mhm.
legally an adult and I'm going to make my own
Amen.
decisions.
Mhm.
That was something that I had found very, very difficult, as an adult dating somebody who I wanted to marry, that, it just felt so countercultural as
Mm,
Americans for us to just like, well, what's the problem here? Just get married and they'll come around. I really appreciated that in Crazy Rich Asians,
mhm.
Rachel didn't have that attitude. She actually ironically proved that she indeed was traditional enough, that she was Chinese enough, in her identity to really acknowledge the real struggle, that she did not want to separate this son from his mother.
Sure.
And that's what I found so moving about the story in this very fun rom-com, that it had such emotional truth to it.
I love that you said that because I do think that it does tap into the emotions of what we experience, whether we're women, the gentlemen who go through certain aspects of these lifestyles and these careers and these trends, whatever they might be. But I do want to talk about something. I don't want to get into anything that's going to be considered racial. However, we do know that there was a lot of criticism that was incurred based on the fact that even though this was a majority Asian cast, there were those who felt that it wasn't quite Asian enough. I mean, because we had the biracial aspect. And I think for Westerners, that seemed okay. But for those who, for example, are of Asian descent and living in China, for example, that wasn't so cool. Could you kind of expound on why that was considered so critical? And why was it important for us to be able to talk about this and to make sure that we're on some sense of the same page, that we can certainly move forward with trying to understand all of our ethnicities?
Sure, yeah. So I think that one thing that is important to keep in mind, and it's difficult for basically all people in dominant culture, which in the United States and most of the world is white culture, to
Mhm.
understand, is that, like, when we talk about a different race, though none of these races are monoliths, they're all part of a diaspora. And when
Mhm.
we're talking about Asians, that is population wise the largest diaspora in the entire world. And so, yes, Crazy Rich Asians is a majority Asian cast, but what does that actually mean? It just means that everybody comes from this one continent that has literally hundreds of ethnicities and languages and countries in it.
Sure.
And it is, and of course absolutely does not include this particular film, does not include all of them. It is very predominantly East Asian,
Mhm.
quite specifically ethnically Chinese, even more specific to that, ethnically Chinese in Singapore. Beyond that, ethnically Chinese in Singapore who are part of the uber rich class.
Mhm. Mhm.
Those are the boundaries of the film. I think because Hollywood, historically, and even now, but just 5 years ago, 5 years ago, when Crazy Rich Asians came out in 2018, there was this was before Parasite, this was before Minari,
Mhm.
this was before Everything
Right.
Everywhere All at Once, this was before The Farewell. It's incredible how much stuff has come out in the past 5 years. But before that, it was Crazy Rich Asians, and then 25 Years, and then Joy Luck Club.
Well, that club, sure.
So it came out in such a void where the entire diaspora was experiencing severe and chronic underrepresentation. So I do understand that when you come out with a movie and you say, finally, a movie for you, Asians, anybody who's not part of that one very specific 1% that this film was depicting is going to say, who said that this film could speak for my experience? You know, it's the one film. And if you end the conversation there and say, well, we made a Crazy Rich Asians, you Asians should be,
We
you're
should be,
done.
yeah, we should be happy
You're
about it.
done.
Right.
Be
Uh-huh.
happy. We
Yeah,
did it. We
right.
solved it.
Move
We
on.
solved
Right.
it. Move
Mhm.
on.
Mhm.
Then
Mhm.
absolutely, that becomes more and more of an impartial representation. If we hopefully see it as a gateway, as
Mhm.
just the first, and we end up having, films about South Asians, Southeast Asians, um, middle class Asians, working
Yeah.
class
Right.
Asians, then it's different. The biracial aspect, I think, probably is maybe about the casting of Henry Golding as the
Yeah, because I
lead. Is
read
that what
that
you
that
mean?
was so controversial and it took quite a while to find the right person for that role.
Yeah, yeah. So that gets to a number of different, very complex aspects. I think that
Mhm.
if we're talking from a purely industry casting standpoint, this was a role that they had to find sort of this believably charming, just universally charming leading man, uh, somebody who had the chops to be sophisticated and poised and suave. It's very specific. And
Right.
it's not that Asian men like that don't exist. Trust me, they
Oh, I'm
exist
sure you're
in
right.
real
Absolutely.
life.
Of course. Of course.
Um,
But he
but
had
those
more British appeal, didn't he?
well, he is British, and
Hmm. Hmm.
Nick Young, I think, as a character, because of colonialism,
Hmm.
it would be appropriate for the character to have a little bit more of a European sensibility than American sensibility for
Gotcha.
somebody that wealthy,
Hmm. Hmm.
to kind of speak in the accent that he does. I think that that's all appropriate and accurate. I think that casting wise, this was Henry Golding's first movie. Before that, he was a travel host and, had never acted. And this was a case of just finding a needle in a haystack of just, he happened to be the one that the
He was the
directors and the
right fit,
casting
right?
directors was the
Yeah.
right fit.
Hmm.
His
Hmm.
father is white. And I think a lot of those criticisms stem from, again, it's a contextual thing. It's,
Hmm.
in my personal opinion, but this is based on my knowledge of this field, is it's not so much that, like, oh, how could, Henry Golding specifically, is problematic in this specific role. It's more that there's a history of Asian men not
Hmm.
being cast in lead romantic roles. And so when you do have somebody who, it feels like, well, why are we always hedging? Is there something wrong with, Asian men who fully present, who are not biracial in some way.
Hmm.
I think that some people felt like this was speaking to that chronic exclusion. That said, I do personally believe it's very important to acknowledge that the Asian diaspora includes multiracial people.
Yeah, I
And
think that's
I
important. Yeah.
personally believe that people who are biracial and multiracial are Asian, period. But that this kind of controversy is not necessarily a fault of a specific project. It's a fault of the system. It's the system
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem.
Hmm. Okay, gotcha. Now you mentioned Joy Luck Club. Now that was what, 25 years ago, I want to say?
30 now, 25
30
at the
years
time
ago?
Crazy Rich
When
Asians
this,
came
okay,
out.
perfect. Exactly. You're exactly right. The fact that it took that long to have this kind of, and we have to say it's historic at this point, kind of representation seems very um, insulting to me. I don't know how you would put it, but uh, as an African American woman, I see this happening a lot in films. And for example, there are certain characters and certain roles that are given to light-skinned Black women, or
Mhm.
white women even, who look a certain way because that would be considered the norm, or that's the way they want to project it. And so I'm wondering, how was your feeling about something like this that took this amount of time to be able to bring us back into the right century where we have the recognition of seeing more Asian representation? Because it just seems to me as though that's just plain ludicrous that it would take this long.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's one of those things where, what do we say? Disappointed but not surprised.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that it's absolutely disappointing, because the talent and the storytelling potential, all of that was there, and clearly all of that was able to be relatable to, Hollywood could have been making a lot of money off of Asian centered stories a long time ago, but in the 25 years between 1993 and 2018, executives I've spoken with who were trying to get
Hmm.
movies made during that time, I mean, these their colleagues, their bosses, who
Hmm.
pretty much all were white, just they sort of had this unquestioned conventional wisdom that nobody will relate to this character because they're Asian, and
Hmm.
we needed an American. And there was also like
Hmm.
no examination of what do you mean when you say American. Um, it's a lot of ignorance.
Yeah.
It's a lot of ignorance and
Hmm. Hmm.
unexamined bias. It's bias that people weren't checking in themselves, that led to a total drought, of studio-backed
Hmm.
Asian-centered films for
Hmm.
25
Hmm.
years.
Hmm.
That's the feeling. It's a shame. It's a missed opportunity all around. It's a missed opportunity for all of the Asian artists and filmmakers who could have been working, and it's a missed opportunity for Hollywood that could have been making money from their work.
Sure, sure. I want to talk a little bit about, because this past Oscar season has been unprecedented, as we know, and it appears as though there's now this renaissance, if you will, this Asian renaissance in Hollywood. It was a delightful thing to be able to sit there and watch our screens to see the Oscar bring such joy to well-deserved actors who have been at the scene, who have paid their dues, who have been working the craft for all these years. And I'm just wondering, what was your perception as you looked at it? And also, I wanted to ask you another question, because you said something in an article. I want to go back to something. It was a short that was done back in 1997, when I think the first Asian woman won an Oscar. I want
Mhm.
to, was her name Janet?
Jessica
Jessica Yu.
Yu.
Yes.
Mhm.
I want to kind of combine those questions. I'm sorry that I'm going in those
No.
multi directions, but I do want to get your take based on where we're going from here, and what your feeling was when you sat and you watched the Academy Awards. And then I want to talk about the film also, in terms of the short based on 1997 winning of Jessica Yu.
Sure.
Mhm.
Um, I think that, I am of a certain age where, I don't think that there's a part of me that will probably never lose the novelty of seeing Asian Americans,
Mhm.
finally be recognized on screen.
Mhm.
I'm hoping that my child, that he'll find that weird. He'll be like, this is so normal
Like,
for me,
mom, come on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my husband and I do still play that game. He's Asian
Uh-huh.
as well, and,
Hmm.
when we're just watching TV, we'll see an
Hmm.
Asian in the background commercial, we're like, "Asian!" And that's because, like, in the '90s, when we were growing up, that was super rare, and it's such a weird thing to be like, why is it so weird to see yourself, like, to see a person from your ancestral continent portrayed on television? It shouldn't be rare,
It shouldn't
right?
be. Yeah.
It shouldn't be, but it is. And so I think that because of it's taken so long, that that novelty will probably not wear off. And so it was quite emotional this year to see. Mostly it was Everything Everywhere All at Once, this
Yes.
one singular, once in a generation film that happens to have been made by a ton of Asian American artists. To succeed, that was just, it's kind of like a pinch me moment where you kind of constantly go back and forth between, like, this is great, and being like, wow, I can't believe we're living in this particular version of the universe where this has happened. Because it wasn't too long ago that it was rare. Last year or 2 years ago, we went to the premiere of Shang-Chi,
Hmm.
Marvel's first Asian superhero, and my husband and I were saying, like, isn't it like we've been to multiple premieres at this point where the lead characters are Asian, but in 2018 when we went to go see Crazy Rich Asians, it
Mm.
felt like I mean, more than the Super Bowl, because the Super Bowl happens every year. It felt like Haley's Comet. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's kind of astounding to me. That's
yeah.
astounding. Can I ask you this question too? Because what are the numbers like? And you may not be able to give me some mathematical answer, but what does it look like in terms of both in front of the camera and behind the camera, in terms of our Asian
Mm,
representation, in Hollywood, whether it's executives, whether it's persons who are the actors or performers. What is happening? Are the numbers increasing? Are we seeing this trajectory going up, or what?
I think that numerically, and I just did a quick Google because I do cover, there's diversity reports that come out
Mhm,
every year.
mhm,
USC and UCLA both do great work in that regard. And my understanding is that, like, the percentage of Asian characters on TV and film, it's kind of like around 6 or 7%, like plus or minus. Like you have a year like Everything Everywhere, the number goes up a little. You don't have a year with that, the number goes down a little, right? So you're still highly dependent
Yes.
on the breakthrough of a couple of projects rather than like a really steady pipeline. Like the percentage of white people remains incredibly secure year after year. You don't even need to count it, right? So I think that the numbers are, like not statistically significant year over year. Although if you look at like a 5-year selection or a 10-year selection, there is a market increase for sure.
Okay.
I think that one thing that is more of a difference is the qualitative aspect of it, which is that these projects are getting more visibility than they were before. So and that's a good and a bad thing. The downside of that is it makes it sometimes feel like there's a lot of progress, which leads to comments that do exist in Hollywood of people saying, it's so hard right now to be white. You can't get a job because now everybody just wants a person of color. I read it in the headlines. There's so much hype about movies and TV shows, with people of color in them. There's no room for white people. That's not true at all.
Not true. Yeah.
That's not true at all,
Right.
statistically. But because there's more, because when you double your numbers and you double it from 2% to 4%, it feels like more of a difference.
But it's still low. The numbers are still low, though. Yeah.
It's still low.
Right.
It's worse for Latinos, who are way more disproportionately underrepresented.
Yeah. Meaning more so than Asian?
In terms of the population. So, like say, for example, Asians and Latinos, to my recollection, let's say they have about 6% representation, in Hollywood year over year. But the population of Latinos in the US is larger.
It's larger, sure.
And particularly in California, particularly in Southern California. So they are the most disproportionately underrepresented demographic in the country, so there's a ways to go for all of these groups.
There is something that you said, because you wrote this article, Culture Shift, Putting the Asian Achievements at the 2023 Oscars in Perspective. I just want to read the headline, because you said it was indeed a historic, massive night for acknowledging Asian artistic accomplishments at the Academy Awards, but relative progress is not the same as absolute progress. I love that you said that, because you spoke truth, sister.
Thank you. That was important for me to say, because I've had conversations, and I had done another interview recently where a Latina showrunner, Gloria Calderon Collette, said, again, she gets feedback, and this is from her colleagues who are very well-meaning, and they say, "Man, you must be so happy you're Latina, right? This is your time." And she's like, "In what world? Am I more fortunate and privileged than a white writer? It's all relative. It's because when you have zero and now you have a non-zero, that is a big leap. But that's still not like, what are we, like 70%, like easily 70% or more of jobs? Right. No, that still belongs to the same people it's always belonged to be honest.
Rebecca, you're funny. I got to ask you, Rebecca, to go back, though, because we didn't hit on the 1997 win of that short. Could you just give me some sort of elaboration on how you felt? Because you said you never saw them. Was the movie called Breathless? Is that what it was called?
It's called Breathing Lessons.
Sorry.
Yeah. I've never seen it. It's a documentary short. So, I could probably, now in the age of the internet, I could probably find access to it. But at the time, this was 97. I was in high school, this is pre-YouTube, I just was watching the Oscars like most Americans were back then. And I saw this woman, never heard of her, don't know anything about the category, don't know anything about the industry, but I saw a Chinese American woman get on stage and win an Oscar. And it was just mind-blowing for me. I've never forgotten it, I don't know anything about her. I've never met her. It's such an obscure Oscar piece of the Oscars, right? One out of 25 categories that was awarded that night. But that stuck with me because it was so rare. but
Wow.
it opened a glimmer of possibility, I think is what I wrote, is just whether or not I ultimately, had decided to go into the industry.
I was just going to ask you, was she the impetus for you to do that?
Not really, to be honest. Like, I mean, not the impetus. I think
Uh-huh.
it made me feel like probably less crazy to try to think that I could maybe have a place here. Um, but it just kind of showed that it was validation and acknowledgement and
Mm,
affirmation,
mhm,
and I
mhm.
think that for those who don't understand the significance of what that feels like, it's probably because you've you already live in a media diet
Yeah.
where that's just normal and commonplace. I think a lot of people who are from any sort of marginalized identity will remember the first
Mhm.
time,
Let me
right?
tell you, you're valued, and your whole life now is cemented permanently because of what you do, and the appreciation has to be told to you, because I think that what you're doing is just great, and I'm so proud of what you're doing too. You're one of our queens, and I'll put it that way. That's what we say in African American community. But I'm
That's
going to give you your
huge
queen,
honor.
um, even
Huge
here, because
honor.
now you're my new sister. But I want to ask you this. Um, Now that we have seen, and we know how much Crazy Rich Asians has been supported, will we see a sequel, and if so, when? I'm sure that's the zillion-dollar question that keeps being bounced around over and over and over again.
It is. I'm hopeful, but from what I know, it will be still quite a while. And then that's
Mhm.
for a number of reasons. And a lot of those are like logistical. I think that I consider the sequel to be in the unofficial term development hell, which is that,
Right.
first of all, the second film was
Uh-huh,
always going to be a lot harder to mount. It
uh-huh,
significantly departs from the book. So they would have
uh-huh,
had to write a totally different
uh-huh.
screenplay. There was a pay equity dispute with the
Oh,
screenwriters, I don't
oh my God.
which I reported on. They offered the Asian woman screenwriter 10% of what they offered the white male
I
co-screenwriter,
read.
and she walked.
Mhm.
She walked, and now she's directing her own film that's coming out this summer. And so they had a lot of trouble with the screenplay, both in terms of just the personnel as well as crafting the story. The actors are, a lot of them have all gone their separate ways. They're doing different things. So I'm sure that Warner Brothers would love to get the gang back together because it was a phenomenon for them.
Mhm.
And I know the fans would love, but it's going to take a while. I don't think they're anywhere close to it. It's set in
Mhm.
China. China does not support Crazy Rich Asians because they do not want to encourage this kind of
Mm.
perception that there's
Mhm.
all this
Mhm.
land wealth and
All this wealth, right?
among the
If
people.
only, right?
Exactly. They're really and they're cracking down in general on
Yeah,
cooperating with Hollywood.
yeah.
So they're going to have to solve that aspect of it. The pandemic kind of put a stop on a lot of things. So I wouldn't hold your breath, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, I'll just have to go back and watch it again and again and again and just be happy with the original.
We'll always have the original.
Love the original. Rebecca, it's been a joy speaking with you. You are such a ray of sunshine, and we are just loving the fact that you're about to become a new mom. You're going to be bringing so much joy into the world with your new baby boy. We congratulate you on that, you and your husband. We want to also make mention once again of your recent award with the inaugural Trailblazer Award from the Coalition of Asian Pacifics in Entertainment. You are deserving. You are worthy. And we thank you, Rebecca. You've been great. This has been so great talking to you. And thank you for opening our eyes and allowing us to become a little bit more interested and a little bit more knowledgeable where diversity is concerned, which is why we're trying to do this series with the
Thank
Ridgefield Playhouse.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I appreciate this conversation. I loved it. And I love the fact that Ridgefield Playhouse has been programming this series. And so anybody who's just even taking the time to participate and watch it, like, thanks for doing that. That makes a difference. It encourages
It
the
does.
industry to make more films like this.
It does. Thank you, and come back and see us, will you?
Would love to do
Okay,
that.
that'll be
Thank you.
great. I should also say that we want to thank our Beyond the Story sponsor, Aquarian Water Company, for this engaging conversation. Rebecca, once again, thank you so much. We'll see you again. And of course, you will see me again with the next edition of our Ridgefield Playhouse Diversity Film Series. I'm Cheryl Washington. See you next time.